Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sarah Abos Jacobson, the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, both here in person and also out in internet land. I understand that there's a big contingent from the Legacy Midtown Park, so a big hello to all of you today as well. Today, you will hear from Mr. Andras Lacko, who was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1936, and he survived the Holocaust in a military hospital and was later reunited with his parents after the Soviets liberated Budapest. And it's an unusual story and a very interesting story. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, Anti-Defamation League Texoma, Dallas After School, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, and the Legacy Senior Communities. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. I would like to also extend a special thank you and welcome to our board members, Generations members, volunteers, and general museum members. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you. If any of you are interested in becoming a museum member or a volunteer, please just visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more. In just a moment, Dr. Lacko will share his story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you are joining us in person today, please feel free to write down any questions you might have on the index card that you received when you were entering the theater. If you are joining us virtually, just click the question and answer button at the bottom of your page, and we will filter those questions in as well during our question and answer section. I now ask you to please silence your cell phones. That is so that we can listen to Dr. Lacko uninterrupted. Also, please do not record this session. We are, in fact, recording it, and we will be posting it in a few days on our YouTube channel, so anybody who wants to rewatch or share with their friends can do it that way as well. It is now my great pleasure to turn things over to Dr. Andras Lacko. Andy.
Thank you very much. To paraphrase the great American writer and speaker of the 19th century, we are living in not only interesting times, but also challenging times. I think it's fair to say. This museum has been one of the first and one of the loudest to declare, after what happened during the Holocaust was digested and talked about, many books, libraries could be filled with the papers that were written about it. And the declaration was never again. While this was a very loud and substantial declaration, unfortunately, early October 2023, all of a sudden, the largest number of Jews, including significant number of American citizens, were killed in Israel. More importantly, perhaps, or at least equally importantly, even before the Israeli military invaded Gaza and started to take action against the perpetrators, there were demonstrations all over the world, including this country, by rowdy crowds demonstrating against Israel and Jews, showing that the call out for never again certainly didn't hold. And this is one of the reasons why I believe we are living in very challenging times. Now, my presentation, as the slide shows, is about the Holocaust in Hungary. It is also focusing on some of the experience of my own immediate and extended families. And as you will see, this is a fairly unique story, and yet it includes all the characteristic and very unfortunate and tragic suffering that the Jewish population suffered, particularly in Europe. I'm trying to move these slides, but they don't seem to be moving.
Maybe got disconnected.
I think I got this turned on.
There we
Oh,
go.
now it's going. Sorry. Shows you how technologically fit I am. This picture shows you where Hungary is. In case you didn't know, Hungary is in East Central Europe. It's a small country that became much smaller after the First World War, which ended in 1918. The country lost 55% of its territory, and as a result, a lot of the political anger was directed against the countries that were involved in conquering Hungary, and of course Germany was the main player in the First as well as in the Second World War. And not surprisingly, some of this anger turned against the Jewish population. And even though the Jewish population in Hungary, which was quite substantial, there were close to 1 million Jews living in Hungary, comprising 10% of the total population. Many successful people, especially in the film industry, ended up in Hollywood and became very famous. Many others emigrated and had great success, getting Nobel Prizes in this country as leading scientists. So the Jewish population for centuries made a large impact, and to a degree continues to make a large impact, even though it's been decreased substantially since the time of the First World War. So turning briefly to my family history, you see me in a crib on the left, and my parents told me that I actually fell out of this bed head on and hit my head. So if any idiosyncrasies resulted from that, I cannot be held responsible for that. In the middle you see my parents' wedding picture, and on the right you see a family gathering that got together for my parents' wedding, primarily comprising of my mother's family, just to draw attention to a couple of people that unfortunately died in the Holocaust. Our family, like many Hungarian Jews who lived in the capital city, Budapest, have been fortunate to lose a relatively small percentage of their members. And in the upper left-hand corner, you see my mother's uncle, gentleman with glasses, leaning into the picture. And up front, the young lady with the white sweater is his daughter. These two folks went out for a walk one day after we were forced to move together with the rest of the family in a 2-bedroom apartment. There were 20 of us who were squeezed in there. These folks went for a walk and we never saw them again. But that's just one of the incidents that we lived through during those times. And again, I'm just giving you a bird's eye view of our family at that time. Focusing on my ventures, you see me in a devil's costume with the red arrow pointing to me in a kindergarten group. And many people tell me that the devil's costume that I wore was perfectly appropriate, describing my general behavior. In the middle, you see me as a budding musician. And on the right, for this particular picture only, I was allowed to get close to the radio set, which otherwise would have been totally off limits, because my parents would have been afraid that I'd do some quick and permanent damage to the set, which was quite realistic. So, looking at the timetable, the Holocaust in Hungary was rather unique. Most of you probably know that the Second World War started in 1939. I believe in 1942, there was a conference in Germany, a Wannsee conference, where leaders of the German government, military, and scientists got together and trying to figure out what would be the quickest way to eliminate the Jewish population in Europe. Because up to that point, there were various ways that they were attempting to kill Jews, shooting them into large holes that were dug in the ground, putting them into closed trucks where they led the exhaust from these trucks to the inside and let people suffocate. During the Wannsee Conference in 1942, there was a systematic plan that evolved, which resulted in transportation, jamming dozens of Jews into small railroad cars, one of them shown upstairs in this building, and then, of course, taking them into concentration and death camps. In the death camps, people who couldn't be taken advantage of as workers, at least on a temporary basis, were quickly taken to gas chambers and exterminated like animals. So this happened relatively early. So as the map shows, as the timetable shows on this slide, March 1944 is when the Holocaust began in Hungary. By that time, most of the 3 million Jews in Poland who were from Poland were actually already gone, and many, many other Jewish people with them from other European countries. So you may ask, why was Hungary so privileged that the Jewish population was allowed to wait until March 1944, by which time, as I mentioned, most of the Hungarian, rather most of the European Jewish population was already gone. Well, Hungary, as opposed to Poland, France, Holland, a lot of other countries, Hungary was an ally of Germany, of Nazi Germany. As a result, many Hungarian soldiers died in the Ukraine during the winter campaign of 1942 and 43. Along with them died many Jewish men who were recruited into the various groups that were supporting the army. My father was very fortunate to be assigned a place in Hungary, so he didn't have to leave the country and eventually was liberated. But we'll talk about that a little later. In any case, for the Holocaust for Hungarian Jews beginning March 19, 1944, quickly, June 1944, many laws were passed, one of which directed Jews to move into more constrained spaces. And you see the apartment building where my cousin's family lived, and that's where a number of families actually were ordered to take residence. And that's where we lived until late 1944, about November. So in the meantime, because of the expertise that Nazi Germany, as well as their Hungarian fascist compatriots, were able to acquire, they acquired tremendous skills to very quickly arrange transportation for the younger Jewish population in Hungary. And another physical geographical fact that helped this process is, as you can see, the many, many little dots that represent synagogues all over the territory of Hungary. All these represents also small communities where the Jews are very easy to round up. And as a result, the majority of the Jewish population that lived in these outer communities were eliminated in about an 8-week period in 1944. In other words, the Nazis managed to kill somewhere around 700,000 Jews from all these communities. And those of us who lived in the capital city, Budapest, were fortunate because we were more difficult to access, and therefore a lot larger percentage of us actually survived. So this is again back to a little bit of my family history. You see my father's book, Official Army Identity Papers. He was also a member of one of these battalions that dig ditches and clean the roads and help the Hungarian army. As I mentioned, fortunately survived the Holocaust and he managed to return. Going to the right on the top, you see my mother in rather unusual clothing for her. She actually had to go into hiding. This occurred once time came for her to be rounded up at one of the railroad stations, and she actually went there. For her, very, very great fortune. The day passed on and became dark, and they sent quite a number of people, including herself, home and told them to come back the next morning. Of course, that's the last thing she was going to do. She took me by my hand. She had a little bag with a couple of pieces of silver in it. Took the yellow star off that designated us as Jews, and we went on the street looking for some place to hide or some place to escape. Well, To our good fortune, we ran into a lady who used to clean her apartment and do the wash. And this lady at this time was already the owner of the apartment of a Jewish doctor who had a 2-story, very luxurious apartment. And she was extremely excited, trying to tell my mother what great fortune befell her, because she had this tremendous improvement in her lifestyle. Well, she took us to this place, and in addition, they managed to get false papers for my mother, claiming that she was a Christian woman. She went into hiding, and she became a dishwasher. She actually took a job, and she managed to survive the last 3 months of the war in this manner. And again, fortunately, she avoided going to a concentration camp or death camp, which hundreds of thousands of other Jewish citizens in Hungary, unfortunately, had to follow. Well, what about me? Well, at that time, I was 8 years old. I couldn't go with my mother because she would be recognized as a Jew. So she put me into a Red Cross facility, which was actually a place, organization for orphans. This didn't last long. They closed that place up in about a week. Then they put us into a roundup place, trying to get thousands of Jews ready to take them into the ghetto, which was planned to be blown up by the Hungarian fascists, who took over by this time because the Germans couldn't trust the regular Hungarian government. And this is where I was with one of my friends. We slept in a china cabinet for about a week, and we were hoping for the best. Well, the best came for me, as Sarah pointed out, who introduced me, in the form of a disease called scarlet fever, which is extremely contagious. And along with 2 other teenagers, I was put into a room to be isolated from the rest of the people, including the Hungarian Nazis who came to take everybody to the ghetto. And in that way, I was able to avoid being taken there. And on the left side, you see the Hungarian ghetto next to the large Jewish synagogue on the right. And that's the police up front at the gate. And they squeezed the 100,000 Jews who comprise the Jewish population of Budapest into about a 6 city square block area, into a number of buildings, which turned out to be very stressful. Diseases were rampant, and again, it's only the arrival of the Soviet troops that saved the Jewish population in Hungary, because they were destined to be blown up by explosives that would surround this area. So, as I mentioned, I was saved by scarlet fever, as it's shown on the top, and I was taken to this very modern hospital, which was at the time one of the newest hospitals. And I was put in there along with Hungarian soldiers who also had scarlet fever. We were given 3 good meals a day, which was very unusual for Jews at the time. And that's where I was getting food, medical care, shelter, and having the great fortune of not having to be exposed to the atrocities and the cruelty that the rest of the Jewish population of Budapest was exposed to at the time. So then came the big surprise. As you can see, the Russian soldiers on the streets of Budapest, fighting began right inside the city. The Germans by that time blew up all the 7 bridges across the Danube River to slow down the progress of the Russian troops. And the hospital where I was housed was outside the city. And one day we woke up and found that the medical staff, nurses, doctors, everybody left. We were left on our own. Unfortunately, they forgot to leave us any food. So the time came when 2 young people and myself had to decide what we were going to do, where are we going to go, how can we survive. So we got on the street. This turned out to be one of the coldest winters in memory. The temperature was minus 20 degrees, and there was snow on the ground, as you can see. I had very poor clothing. Nevertheless, we got on the street and started walking, began our journey towards the place where I used to live. And this took, even though it was only about 10 miles, eventually took us. You can see the black line that designates the distance. And the final place is on the left near the Danube River. The hospital is on the right, that's a blue dot. And that's the journey we had to cover. Now, you see the chain bridge, which is one of the 7 bridges that span the Danube, and as I mentioned, it was blown up and it was in the water. You also see the Royal Palace on the left, nearly totally obliterated. Fortunately, they managed to rebuild it, and if you ever go visit Budapest, there is an art gallery and there's all kinds of things up there. It's a beautiful building and it's really worthwhile seeing. But I'm digressing from the Holocaust story. So we got on the street and started walking. And one of the first places where we managed to take a rest was a factory called the Guns Factory that manufactured tractors and other vehicles. And there was a lot of shooting going on there. So we quickly dug down and got into a small room in the basement. We were there about 10 minutes when a bunch of Russian soldiers came in. 2 of them carried a 3rd very badly injured Russian soldier who was bleeding. And they put this soldier right on top of a little bag where I had all my clothing and all my belongings. So from that point on, I didn't even have a change of clothes because that all got bloody and had to be thrown away. But that was just one of the interesting experiences that some of us had to get through, even though I was only 8 years old. Somehow I managed. Overall, we were walking along the black line, and people along the way gave us shelter, amazingly, and food. We managed to find some candles because there was no electricity. And we just kept on going. And of course, my journey was the longest because the other two boys dropped off earlier. And I had to go all the way over to the Danube. Along the way, when we got to the position, you see the final mile of the journey when the arrow goes straight down. I'm sorry, my pointer doesn't, oh, there it works. Okay. So when we got here, this was the final path, the final distance that I had to cover before we got to the district where we used to live. And at that point, I developed a very serious case of dysentery. I was very ill. Somehow a young couple took me in, and they nursed me to good health in a couple of days. And at that point, I was ready to take the final segment of the journey to get back home. Here, they told me, if I don't find my parents, please come back. They wanted to adopt me. I said, okay. Thanked them, and I left. Fortunately, I did find my parents eventually. And as you will see, the rest of history, I'll give you a few highlights of what excuse me, what happened afterwards. One of the things I want to show you, which I forgot to mention, and that's this picture right here. You see the Danube River here, and you see a bunch of shoes being lined up. And what these shoes represent is to memorialize the people who died there. At this time, the Nazis ran out of railroad cars, and they lost the facility to ship Jews over to Auschwitz and other places and other death camps. And what they did is take people out of the Danube and just shoot them into the river. That's how the last vestiges of the Jewish population were actually killed, who didn't have the good fortune to survive the Holocaust. So that is what represents. I just wanted to show you that because this is significant, and this is a memorial that, again, you could see yourself if you visited Budapest. So back to the journey here. I eventually made it back to the neighborhood where I was born and where I came from. The day after I arrived, my mother showed up. She was beside herself because she and her aunt went all the way up to the hospital looking for me because they somehow found out that that's where I was staying before we got on the journey. And of course we couldn't stay there because there was no heat, no food, nothing, but they were not aware of that. But anyway, we were back together, and like all other people who lived through the war and the Holocaust, we hope to have a new life and build back to where we were before. going backwards here. Okay. So, how did I get all the way out here? Well, you see my picture in my Hungarian identity papers, and it's stamped January 1957 by the Canadian authorities. Well, I'm not going to give you the whole story of how I got there, but that is where I ended up in Canada for a number of years, because the revolution that broke out in Hungary in '56 lasted only 10 days. And even though the revolution failed, it allowed an opportunity for 150,000 people to leave. And being already a university student at the time put me in a privileged position to get transportation directly to Canada at a very early stage of the refugee transport. And I ended up in the city of Vancouver on the west coast, one of the most beautiful places in the world. On the right, you see a briefcase which I gave to one of my granddaughters, because that briefcase held all my possessions at the time. And it's a good thing to keep in mind, you know, where we come from and what we had to do to be where we are today. You see me in donated clothes on the streets of Vancouver looking for a job that took me almost 2 months, but eventually I succeeded. On the right you see the map, and this is where Budapest is, that is where Vancouver is, and this is Texas. So that's the journey I completed over the years, and I must say I feel very fortunate to be United States citizen, graduate of American University, having been able to establish a career, get a good position, and have a very nice family. As you can see, the upper left-hand corner, that's about 5 years ago, our adventure, our whole family is at Possum Kingdom Lake here in Texas. Underneath, here is my cousin, who unfortunately just left us about 3 months ago. She established a family in Sweden. These two couples now have 7 children, and I just visited them last week, and they're doing very well. On the right, you see 3 of my granddaughters, and these 3, and that's my niece in Italy, who eventually emigrated there. She is a concert violinist, and she's teaching children how to play the violin over there. So, as you can see, this is a long journey, not as arduous as what some people had to go through, who were taken to concentration camps, and many of them to death camps. But it provided me with an interesting experience, and I left out some not so pleasant experiences that resulted in anti-Semitism expressed by people whom I encountered. Nevertheless, I thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'll attempt to answer those.
Thank you, Dr. Lacko. If any of you in the audience here have any questions, please just hold up the index card you were given, and there are staff members in the audience, so they'll come around. And in the meantime, I'll start with some questions that came in to us from online. This person asks, when was the Shoe Statue Memorial on the Danube River installed? Do you know? And was there anything there before they put it up?
Well, I think it was installed 30 or 40 years ago. I don't know the exact time, but it wasn't immediately after the war. I know that. And I realize this is not a very good answer, but it's an important memorial because it gives you an idea about the cruelty and the desperation of the Nazis that were willing to go to this extent to just kill as many Jews as possible.
Okay. This person asks, can you talk a bit about the Arrow Cross Party and what happened to them after the war?
Okay, well, the Arrow Cross Party were the fascists that I referred to who were shooting the people into the water. And they actually had a place in Parliament, but they emerged victorious when the Hungarian government basically gave up. And in fact, the Nazis forced them to resign because they didn't trust them anymore. And the Arrow Cross government was only in power for about 2 months. And after that, they hung most of their leaders. They were convicted and executed for their deeds, for the crimes they committed against humanity in Hungary. Unfortunately, there is a party that they sort of inherited some of the philosophy of the Arrow Cross. They're not quite as violent, but if they were given the opportunity, I wouldn't be surprised if they think about it at least. So, unfortunately, fascism, anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews and others is inherent in some of the Hungarian population. And even though the current government doesn't give them enough space to operate, they're still there. And that's why so many Jews eventually end up in Israel, because that's the only safe place, perhaps, for the Jewish population. Even though the many wars Israel goes through, there are dangers, but at least it's their country.
This person wants to know if you witnessed any of the shootings on the Danube, or was this occurring while you were in the hospital?
Sorry, what?
Did you witness any of the shootings in the Danube, or did this occur while you were in the hospital?
No, I did not witness any of that, exactly for the reason that I was miles away in the hospital that was actually outside the city. The shooting took place right in the middle of the city, which is where the river flows.
Okay. Have you returned to Budapest since you left? Did you have any family or friends who survived and remained in the city?
Yeah, there were actually quite a few. I mean, our extended family consisted of over 20 people, and only 3 of them died. I've been back to Budapest many times, and I actually finished high school in Hungary after the Holocaust. So I knew many people. Most of them are gone, but I did go back and visited family as well as friends.
Do you remember interacting with Soviet soldiers during or after the liberation of Budapest? And did they care that you were Jewish?
I did interact with the Russian soldiers. My cousin and I, who went to Sweden, I showed you her picture. We used to get on the street every morning and start begging bread from the Russian soldiers, who were actually quite accommodating in this regard. They never asked us who we were. They just knew we were hungry. And fortunately, they were willing to accommodate us for the most part.
Okay. To follow up on that, this person would like to know, to what do you attribute your survival those critical few months after the war ended and Budapest was destroyed? They go on, you had little resources or food. Were there any external relief efforts coming in from Allied forces?
That's
It's a good question.
very good question. I don't remember getting food at that time because the war was still going on. I mean, the war ended in May 1945. By that time, my parents reopened their grocery store, and things were not normal, but they're beginning to get back there. The first few weeks after I was reunited with my mother and eventually both of my parents, it was difficult. There was very little food. I remember being given just the peels of potatoes that we considered the delicacy as the adults were cooking. My mother discovered a box of canned goods, which were treated like gold. And in addition, they got on the street and tried to trade with people. One time, my mother traded her raincoat for some meat, I remember. So those are, as I mentioned earlier, interesting times, but we survived. There was no electricity, there was no hot water. There were dead horses on the street, which we didn't eat, but a lot of people did. And it took a while for things to get back to normal.
Are you able to talk more about how your mother got the false identity papers she got?
Well, like I mentioned to you, we met the lady on the street who used to work as a house cleaner. And she gave my mother one of her relatives' papers. And then my mother walked into a district where Jews didn't live and rented a very small room and got a job as a dishwasher, and that's how she survived.
How did you get reunited with your father, and what happened to your parents when you went to Canada?
Interesting question. Of course, when my father got back, I got reunited with both of my parents. We still didn't have our own place because our place got bombed out. After my parents reopened their store, business was very good. They were able to save enough money in 2 years to actually buy an apartment. And that's where we lived. As far as, what's the other question? What happened when I came to Canada?
No, what happened to your parents when you went to Canada?
Okay. Well, my parents stayed in Hungary, but they rejoined me 7 years later. I arranged for them to get transportation, and an organization that was providing money for Jewish people to get out paid for their transportation. And they ended up in Vancouver, and that's when where both of them are buried.
Do you still identify as Hungarian, or do you feel more American at heart now, or do you feel like you're both? It's a good question.
As far as feeling, I feel more like an American than anything else. Just before the talk here, Hungarian lady came up to me and told me that she heard about me, and we started talking Hungarian, and I can still speak reasonably well. So I have some affiliation with Hungary, but in terms of the country's goals, the people's feelings and accommodation of almost all nationalities and races in this country, I feel much more at home here than I ever felt in Hungary.
Okay. Did you ever see the family that helped nurse you back to health before you were reunited with your mother again?
No.
Okay. You mentioned a lot about your 10-mile physical journey. This person would like to know what you remember feeling during that journey. Were you hopeful? Were you frightened? Did you think you would make it back home? Did you think you would see your parents again? You know, what was going through your mind as you went through this journey?
Some of you might have seen the Italian movie called It's a Wonderful Life, where a little boy is totally concealed from the Nazis and the Holocaust and all that. Well, I didn't have my parents to help me there, but basically I felt like this was a game that I was going through. Fortunately, I had enough chutzpah, as they say in French, and skills to survive, and did okay. And I didn't feel frightened at any time that I can recall. I was just trying to figure out a way to get on and survive.
Okay. Can you share more about your life and career after the war? And as part of this, what drew you to science? What drew you to science? And talk a bit about your life and career after the war.
Okay. Well, in the Jewish tradition, when boys reach their 13th birthday, they have a celebration called a bar mitzvah, and they get lots of presents. Well, one of the presents I got was a chemistry set, and this was back in Hungary. And my mother didn't appreciate this when I started experimenting in our bathroom. But it did me enough, it provided me with enough inspiration to eventually pursue biochemistry, which is where I got a doctorate at the University of Washington, and I taught at University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth and did research. I don't know what more I can tell you about it, except I was very fortunate for me to get into a high school, which was an accidental event, where I had very good education at a very early age, because there were professors that were politically deprived of their position teaching in high school. And that's where I learned a lot of chemistry at a very early age and biology.
And for those of you who are listening today, Dr. Lacko is being extremely, extremely modest because he was actually world-renowned during his career. Well, it's true. Okay, this is a two-part question. Are you frightened by rising anti-Semitism today? That's part one. And what can Christians and other non-Jewish people do to support and help our Jewish neighbors?
Well, physically, I'm not frightened because I trust the law enforcement in this country, and at least the present government is holding a pretty tight reins on these organizations. As far as what Christians can do, one of the things you do is to attend these kind of talks and be interested in what happens to Jewish people. And when there is an opportunity to support Jewish causes, at least to the extent of protecting us from violence and ill will of other people would be most appreciated. And there is a charitable organization where Christians and Jews, in fact more than one, provide food and assistance to poor people in Israel. These are the kind of things that I think are very helpful. And I am most grateful to all these organizations that support the cause of, first of all, protecting everyone as far as civil rights, and particularly helping the Jewish people to be in a strong defensive position, not to be victims again to anything like the Holocaust.
Okay, final question. What gives you hope that future generations will stay with the saying, never again?
I used to think that programs like this, where people come and listen and learn somewhat in depth about what happened, how is it possible that people can be so cruel that they eventually decide to systematically kill other people? I thought that this was sufficient to keep people from hating each other and eventually committing atrocities against one another. Unfortunately, we've seen tremendous crowds on the streets, even in this country, where people who were nearly totally ignorant of what they're demonstrating about, as some of the interviews revealed, is very frightening, because if you can induce people to do things so quickly and so easily, you wonder what it would take again for them to take violent acts.
Thank you so much, Andras, and thank you all for joining us today. Our next Summer Survivor speaker will be on Friday, July 11th at the same time, 1 o'clock in the theater, and we will be hosting Phil Glauben, who is the son of Holocaust survivor Max Glauben, who was one of the co-founders of the museum. Max was from Warsaw, Poland, and he lived in the ghetto until the uprising, at which point he and his family were deported to Majdanek death camp and concentration camp, among others. And Max just recently passed away in 2022. So we hope you can join us then to hear from Max's son, Phil. And thank you so much for joining us today.